The streets of Carthage ran red not just with blood, but molten gold on that final day, as Roman soldiers torched the greatest city of the ancient Mediterranean. The very air shimmered with the ghosts of 1,000 merchant ships and 100 battle cries. How could this happen? This wasn't some backwater settlement. It was the beating heart of trade, the pinnacle of Phoenician ingenuity, a superpower that once made Rome tremble. Today we uncover the truth behind the legend, from its birth as a humble trading post to the apocalyptic moment when Rome poured salt into Carthage's wounds. You'll witness the cunning of Hannibal, the treachery of treaties, and the shocking tactics that turned a civilization into cautionary tales. The story of Carthage isn't just about destruction. It's about how empires are built, how they fall, and why even the mightiest can vanish beneath the sands of time. Long before Carthage became a name whispered in fear across the ancient world, it was just a flicker of ambition in the eyes of Phoenician traders. Picture this: skilled sailors from the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon, cutting through Mediterranean waves on ships built with revolutionary techniques, wooden planks locked together with mortise and tenon joints. Sails dyed the famous Tyrian purple. These weren't just merchants, they were pioneers, threading the sea like a needle through cloth, leaving behind a trail of trading posts from Cyprus to Spain. But one colony would outshine them all. According to legend, Carthage began with a queen's cunning. Dido, fleeing tyranny in Tyre, struck a deal with local North African rulers. She could claim whatever land a single ox hide could cover. But she wasn't about to be outsmarted. Slicing the hide into thin strips, she encircled an entire hill, the future Barca, the heart of Carthage. Whether myth or history, the story captures the Phoenician spirit, resourceful, adaptable, always one step ahead. And what a legacy they left. The Phoenicians didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas. Their alphabet, with its simple 22 letters, became the ancestor of Greek, Latin, even the script you're reading now. Their ships, lean and fast, mastered the treacherous currents of the open sea. Carthage inherited all of it: the networks, the knowledge, the hunger for more. But here's the twist: this wasn't just a copy of the old Phoenician ways. Like a child outgrowing its parent, Carthage would soon take those foundations and build something bolder, fiercer, entirely its own. The sun never seemed to set on Carthage's golden age. Imagine walking the docks in the 5th century before the Common Era, where ships from every corner of the known world unloaded their treasures: Spanish silver, African ivory, Greek pottery, and jars of precious Tyrian dye, each ounce worth more than gold. The city's wealth wasn't just stacked in warehouses, it pulsed through the streets, a living testament to the mercantile genius of its people. While Rome was still wrestling with its kings and scratching out a living from the Italian soil, Carthage had already perfected the art of empire. Its government ran like clockwork, not ruled by a single tyrant, but guided by the suffetes, elected judges who balanced power with a council of merchant elites. This wasn't just politics, it was a finely tuned machine designed to keep trade flowing and profits growing. Yet the real secret to Carthage's dominance lay beyond the city walls. Vast estates sprawled across North Africa, worked by laborers and slaves, producing mountains of grain, olives, and grapes. The Carthaginians didn't just farm, they engineered the land, digging intricate irrigation systems that turned arid soil into fields of plenty. But such opulence didn't go unnoticed. Across the sea, Rome watched first with curiosity, then with a hunger that would change everything. The very wealth that made Carthage magnificent also made it a target. Every gold coin, every loaded ship was another reason for rivals to dream of conquest. Prosperity, it turned out, could be as dangerous as weakness. Tensions boiled over on the sun-baked island of Sicily, where the ambitions of Carthage and Rome collided like two warships in a storm. What started as a local dispute over the city of Messana spiraled into a titanic 23-year struggle. The First Punic War, a conflict so brutal it reshaped the ancient world. Rome, a land power with barely a navy to its name, faced an impossible challenge, defeating the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean. But desperation breeds innovation. In just 60 days, Roman engineers built a fleet from scratch, and then came their secret weapon, the corvus, a massive boarding bridge that could slam down onto enemy decks. Imagine the horror of Carthaginian crews as these mechanical jaws locked their agile ships in place, turning sea battles into bloody infantry brawls where Rome's legions held the advantage. Victory came at a staggering cost. At the Battle of the Aegates Islands, Rome shattered Carthage's last great fleet, but not before both sides had lost nearly 1,000 ships combined, along with countless lives swallowed by the waves. The peace terms were merciless. Carthage emptied its coffers to pay Rome's war debts, surrendered Sicily, and watched helplessly as Rome claimed its first overseas province. Yet the true sting wasn't just in the gold or territory lost, it was pride. For the first time, Carthage had been humbled by an upstart, and somewhere in the smoldering ruins of that defeat, a young boy named Hannibal Barca listened to his father's oath of vengeance. The First Punic War wasn't an end. It was the spark that would ignite an even greater fire. Hannibal Barca wasn't just a military leader. He was a force of nature, a storm that rolled down from the mountains and shook Rome to its core. At just 26 years old, he inherited more than his father Hamilcar's command. He carried the weight of Carthage's vengeance, and what vengeance it would be. His audacity defied logic, marching an army of 50,000 men and 37 war elephants across the towering Alps in winter. It was madness. The cold gnawed at their bones, avalanches buried entire squads, and hostile tribes lurked in every pass. Yet Hannibal pressed on. When his elephants stumbled on narrow cliff paths, when his soldiers froze in their tracks, he led by example, forging ahead until, against all odds, they burst onto the Italian plains like ghosts materializing from the snow. Rome had never seen anything like it. Then came Cannae, a masterpiece of blood and strategy. Outnumbered nearly 2-1, Hannibal didn't just defeat the Romans, he orchestrated their annihilation. Feigning weakness, he lured their massive force into a deadly embrace, his center retreating while his wings curled inward like a pair of crushing fists. The Roman army, packed too tight to even raise their swords, became a slaughterhouse. By day's end, 50,000 lay dead in the dust, a grim testament to Hannibal's genius. Why then did he fail to deliver the killing blow? Charisma alone couldn't sustain his campaign. His army, a patchwork of mercenaries from Spain, Gaul, and North Africa, began fracturing as the war dragged on. Rome, though battered, refused to break. They avoided direct confrontations, scorched their own lands to deny Hannibal supplies, and slowly tightened the noose. The man who could outthink any general couldn't outlast an entire people's will to survive. The turning point came not on the battlefield, but across the sea. While Hannibal was pinned down in Italy, Rome struck where Carthage was weakest, their homeland. A young Roman commander named Scipio took the fight to Africa, forcing Hannibal to abandon Italy after 15 grueling years. The stage was set for one final, devastating clash. The legend of Hannibal would endure, but the fate of Carthage was about to be decided. While Hannibal's shadow still loomed large over Italy, a young Roman commander named Scipio saw an opportunity to rewrite the rules of war. Instead of chasing the Carthaginian general through the countryside, he took the fight straight to the heart of Carthage itself, a daring gamble that would change everything. Scipio wasn't just attacking a city, he was striking at the very foundation of Hannibal's power. The moment Hannibal received word that Roman legions were marching across North Africa, he had no choice but to abandon Italy after 15 grueling years. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. For the first time, the hunter became the hunted. The stage was set for a final confrontation between two of history's greatest military minds, Hannibal, the brilliant tactician, and Scipio, the relentless innovator. Their clash came at Zama in 202 before the Common Era. Hannibal, ever the strategist, lined up his war elephants at the front, planning to break the Roman lines with sheer terror. But Scipio had studied his opponent. He ordered his troops to open gaps in their formation, letting the panicked elephants charge harmlessly through. Then came the Roman trump card, their cavalry, honed by years of fighting in Spain, swept around and smashed into Hannibal's rear. The Carthaginian army, once unstoppable, collapsed under the weight of its own fading momentum. The peace terms were nothing short of crushing. Carthage surrendered its entire fleet, once the pride of the Mediterranean, leaving just 10 ships to patrol its waters. Spain, Sicily, all its overseas territories gone. Even worse, the city was forbidden to wage war without Rome's permission, effectively reducing it to a client state. But the deepest wound wasn't written in the treaty. It was the unshakable Roman suspicion that Carthage, despite its defeat, would rise again, and that fear, more than any battle, would seal the city's fate. Carthage refused to die quietly. With its military claws clipped by Rome's harsh peace terms, the city did what it had always done best: it adapted. The same merchant spirit that once built an empire now turned inward, transforming North Africa's sun-baked soil into rivers of gold. While Rome watched for signs of rebellion, Carthage quietly orchestrated an economic resurrection. The secret lay in the land itself. Carthage's hinterlands weren't just fertile, they were a farmer's dream. Ingenious irrigation systems, some dating back centuries, turned arid plains into oceans of wheat, olives, and grapes. Workers harvested pomegranates so lush their juice stained the market stalls crimson, while groves of fig trees yielded fruit so sweet it fetched premium prices across the Mediterranean. Even stripped of its warships, Carthage still ruled one thing absolutely: trade. Merchants became the new generals, fighting battles with ledgers instead of swords. Forbidden from waging war, they skirted Roman restrictions with clever loopholes. A ship banned from carrying weapons might instead transport rare timber perfect for spear shafts. Granaries ostensibly storing grain for local use mysteriously supplied rebel factions in distant lands. The Romans grumbled about Carthage's unfair wealth, but couldn't deny its resourcefulness, like a fox that keeps finding its way back into the henhouse. But prosperity has its own dangers. In Rome, senators like Cato the Elder grew obsessed with Carthage's revival. Visiting the city as part of a delegation, he was reportedly shocked by its bustling ports and overflowing warehouses, proof that defeat hadn't broken its spirit. Legend claims he began ending every speech, no matter the topic, with the same chilling phrase: "Carthage must be destroyed." What terrified Rome wasn't Carthage's weakness, but its resilience. The city's very ability to rise again made its final fate inevitable, and so the stage was set for tragedy. Every shipload of African grain, every clever evasion of Roman sanctions, stoked the fires of paranoia in the Senate. Carthage didn't realize its greatest sin wasn't rebellion, it was success. The same fertile fields that fed its revival would soon feed Roman legions camped outside its walls. The merchants who outsmarted trade restrictions would soon barter for their own survival as ashes rained down on the streets they once filled with gold. There was something chilling about the way Cato the Elder's voice cut through the Roman Senate. No matter the debate, tax reforms, road repairs, even festivals, he always found a way to circle back to the same three words: Carthago Delenda Est. Carthage must be destroyed. At first, his colleagues dismissed it as the obsession of an old man. But repetition has power, and soon those words began to seep into Rome's collective psyche like poison. Was it genuine terror driving Cato or political theater? The truth might lie in his journey to Carthage itself. Sent as part of a diplomatic mission, the senator expected to find a broken city humbled by decades of Roman dominance. Instead, he walked streets humming with activity, docks piled high with goods, markets bursting with exotic spices, fields so lush they seemed to mock Italy's droughts. To Cato, this wasn't resilience, it was a provocation. The sight of Carthage thriving without an army, without colonies, purely through trade and agriculture, shook him to his core. If they could rebuild this fast, what might they do with a generation of peace? His rhetoric played on Rome's deepest insecurities. Every olive tree they plant is a spear waiting to be thrown, he warned. Every ship in their harbor is a future warship in disguise. It didn't matter that Carthage had scrupulously followed Rome's demands since Zama. Fear rarely bothers with facts. Cato framed prosperity itself as an act of aggression, turning merchants into soldiers and harvests into weapons. And with each speech, the Senate's mood shifted from vigilance to vengeance. All they needed was a spark, and Carthage, tragically, provided it. When neighboring Numidia began raiding Carthaginian territory, the desperate city finally raised a militia to defend itself. Technically, this violated their treaty with Rome. Never mind that Rome had secretly encouraged the Numidian attacks. The transgression was all the excuse the Senate needed. After years of Cato's relentless mantra, Rome's patience had run dry. The Third Punic War wouldn't be fought over territory or treasure, but over an idea that Carthage's very existence was a threat. And this time, they intended to settle the question permanently. The Third Punic War wasn't a battle for dominance, it was an extermination. Rome had waited half a century for the perfect excuse to finish what Hannibal's defeat at Zama had begun. When Carthage dared to defend itself against Numidian raids, Rome had quietly encouraged, the Senate pounced. Never mind that Carthage had disarmed decades earlier, surrendering its warships and paying tribute on time. This was about erasing a shadow that had haunted Rome's nightmares for generations. Siege engines rolled toward Carthage's walls in 149 before the Common Era, their wooden frames creaking under the weight of Roman determination. Inside the city, panic turned to defiance. Carthaginians tore up their own homes for timber to build makeshift warships. Women cut off their hair to weave into ropes for catapults. Even as hunger gnawed at their stomachs, they held out not for months but for 3 agonizing years. Then came the final assault. Roman legions breached the outer walls, only to find Carthage had transformed itself into a death trap. Every street became a killing zone, every rooftop a sniper's perch. The fighting was so brutal that Scipio Aemilianus, Rome's commanding general, later confessed he felt the gods themselves were weeping. When the last stronghold, the Temple of Eshmun, fell, the survivors faced an unthinkable choice. Some leapt into the flames with their children rather than endure Roman slavery. Others, herded into the ruins of their marketplace, were sold like livestock to foreign traders. But Rome wasn't content with mere conquest. Soldiers pried apart Carthage stones, toppling columns that had stood for centuries. They salted the earth, not literally, as legend claims, but through a systematic campaign to obliterate all traces of Carthaginian identity. The libraries burned, the harbor silted up, and the language of Hannibal faded into whispers. Was this justice or horror? Rome claimed it acted in self-defense against a perpetual threat. Yet Carthage in its final years was no empire. Just a city of merchants and farmers, stripped of power but still guilty of the one sin Rome could never forgive, the audacity to endure. Some historians call it the first recorded genocide. Others argue it was simply how empires behaved in an age where mercy meant weakness. But perhaps the most haunting question isn't about Rome's morality. It's about what the world lost when an entire civilization was reduced to ashes and cautionary tales. For centuries, Carthage lay forgotten beneath the quiet hills of Tunisia, its stories silenced, its glory reduced to fragments in Roman texts. Then, in the early 19th century, something extraordinary happened. Archaeologists began brushing away layers of dust and time, revealing a civilization Rome had tried desperately to erase. But piecing together Carthage's past wasn't just a matter of digging. It was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces had been deliberately burned. The ruins told a story the victors never wanted told. Take the famous circular harbor, once the heart of Carthage's naval power. When excavators finally uncovered its sunken contours, they found it wasn't just a dock, but a masterpiece of engineering. Imagine a hidden island at its center, ringed by shipyards where sleek warships were built in secrecy. This wasn't merely a port, it was a statement of ambition, buried but never truly lost. Then there was the Toffet. This eerie sanctuary, stacked with small urns, forced historians to confront one of Carthage's most debated legacies. Were these child sacrifices, as Roman propaganda claimed, or simply burials for infants lost to disease? The truth remains tangled in politics and prejudice, but the discovery forced the world to reckon with Carthage on its own terms, not just through the lens of its enemies. Even the city's streets held revelations. Beneath modern Tunis, archaeologists traced the ghostly outlines of Carthage's grid-like neighborhoods, proving its planners rivaled Greek and Roman urban genius. Every broken pottery shard, every charred beam whispered secrets about daily life, what people ate, how they traded, even the gods they prayed to when Rome wasn't listening. Yet for all we've uncovered, Carthage still guards its mysteries. Vast sections lie untouched beneath villas and vineyards, waiting for the next stroke of a trowel. Who knows what letters, treaties, or treasures might still emerge? The Romans tried to bury Carthage twice, first under fire, then under silence. But cities, like stories, have a way of rising from their own ashes. The air around Carthage's Toffet must have hung thick with incense and murmured prayers, a sacred space where the divine and mortal worlds collided. Thousands of small urns, each containing the fragile bones of infants, were carefully buried here over centuries, silent witnesses to one of history's most debated rituals. Were these offerings to the gods, as Rome claimed, or simply the heartbreaking remnants of a city mourning its youngest lost to illness? The truth lies tangled somewhere between propaganda and piety. Roman writers like Diodorus painted horrific scenes, parents sacrificing children to appease Baal Hammon during crises, bronze statues of the god extending arms to receive infants into fiery pits. But here's the problem. Rome had every reason to vilify Carthage. Victors don't just conquer land, they rewrite history. Modern archaeology complicates the narrative. Some urns show signs of premature births or congenital defects suggesting natural deaths. Yet others bear inscriptions invoking Tanit, the mother goddess, and Baal Hammon, words like vow fulfilled, hinting at something more solemn than simple burial. Carthage's gods mirrored its people, cosmopolitan and adaptable. Baal Hammon, with his roots in Phoenician storm deities, evolved into a protector of seafarers and merchants. Tanit, often depicted with a crescent moon, watched over fertility and the home. Together, they formed a spiritual anchor for a population spanning Africans, Greeks, Iberians, and Levantines. Temples doubled as cultural crossroads where Libyan farmers prayed beside Sicilian artisans, all united under Carthage's pantheon. This religious melting pot didn't just reflect diversity, it sustained it. While Rome demanded assimilation, Carthage allowed communities to keep their native rituals alongside state cults. A Greek sailor might pour libations to Poseidon at the docks, then offer incense to Tanit in the public square. Such flexibility wasn't just tolerance, it was strategy. By weaving together threads of faith, Carthage turned differences into strength. but the Toffet lingers in our imagination because it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How do we separate fact from ancient smear campaigns? What does it mean when a civilization's deepest truths are filtered through the voices of its destroyers? The urns remain, but their stories shift with each generation's gaze, reminders that history is less about finding answers than learning how to ask better questions. And just as Carthage's gods bridged continents, so too did its culture. Beyond the temples and tombs, the city thrived as a labyrinth of languages, cuisines, and ideas. A true Mediterranean crossroads where every ship brought not just goods but pieces of distant worlds. Walk through the markets of ancient Carthage, and you'd hear a symphony of languages: Phoenician traders haggling in their ancestral tongue, Greek artisans debating over pottery designs, Berber farmers calling out prices in their native dialects. This wasn't just a city of merchants, it was a living mosaic of cultures where every ship that docked brought not just goods but entire worlds. Carthage thrived because it never forced people to choose between identities. A potter could honor Egyptian gods at home, speak Greek to customers, and swear oaths in the name of Baal Hammon at the docks. The evidence is etched into surviving artifacts. A single Carthaginian necklace might combine Phoenician goldsmithing techniques with Berber gemstones and motifs inspired by Greek mythology. Their architecture borrowed Egyptian column designs but adapted them for local materials, creating a style that was distinctly North African yet universally Mediterranean. Even their legal system reflected this flexibility. Contracts were often written in both Phoenician and Libyan, ensuring no party lost meaning in translation. Rome took a starkly different approach. Conquered peoples were expected to adopt Latin, worship Roman gods, and reshape their traditions to fit imperial ideals. Carthage, by contrast, let cultures coexist. Libyan farmers kept their land agreements, Greek settlers maintained their theaters, and Phoenician priests preserved ancient rites. This wasn't mere tolerance, it was strategic genius. By making room for everyone, Carthage turned diversity into an economic engine, yet this openness had a cost. Rome's uniformity bred loyalty, a single identity to fight for. Carthage's mercantile elite, while brilliant at networking, sometimes struggled to unite their patchwork society against existential threats. When Hannibal marched on Rome, his army was a coalition of mercenaries, each with their own language and motives. Scipio's legions, meanwhile, moved as one. The question lingers: was Carthage's cosmopolitanism its greatest innovation or its fatal flaw? Perhaps both. It built an empire without iron fists, where ideas flowed as freely as goods across the docks. But in the end, empires need more than trade routes to survive, they need shared purpose. Carthage taught the Mediterranean how to live together. Rome ruthlessly taught it how to obey. The Carthaginian fleet sliced through Mediterranean waves like blades through silk, each vessel a testament to centuries of maritime mastery. While Rome struggled to build its first warships from copied blueprints, Carthage's shipyards had already perfected designs honed by generations of Phoenician sailors. Their quinquiremes, massive five-tiered rowing galleys, weren't just boats, they were floating fortresses with reinforced rams that could splinter enemy hulls like kindling. Yet what truly set them apart lay beneath the waterline, a revolutionary hull design that combined speed for pursuit with stability for open sea storms. Navigating without compasses or charts, Carthaginian captains read the sea like a familiar road. By day, they track the sun's angle and the color shifts in coastal waters. A patch of turquoise might signal shallow reefs, while dark blue promised deep passages. At night, they steered by the constellations, following the same stars that had guided their ancestors from Tyre centuries earlier. One surviving manual even described using seabird flight patterns to locate land beyond the horizon. This wasn't just sailing, it was an art passed down in whispered rituals from father to son. their boldest voyages pushed beyond the known world. Hanno the Navigator allegedly took 60 ships past the Pillars of Hercules, modern Gibraltar, down Africa's western coast, encountering volcanoes and gorillas his crew mistook for hairy men. Another expedition might have reached Britain's Tin Islands, trading purple dyes for precious metals. While historians debate how far they truly sailed, one thing's certain: no other civilization of their time dared venture so far into the unknown. Rome initially had no answer to this naval dominance. Early Roman tactics relied on brute force, the famous Corvus boarding bridges that turned sea battles into land fights. But Carthage fought like wolves harrying a bear, using superior maneuverability to outflank heavier Roman vessels. They perfected the decisive maneuver, ships darting through enemy lines to shear oars and cripple foes without ever closing to boarding range. Yet this same reliance on naval brilliance sowed the seeds of downfall. When Rome finally mastered shipbuilding after the First Punic War, Carthage lost its decisive edge. Their admirals, trained in centuries of tactical finesse, struggled to adapt when faced with Rome's relentless production of ships and sailors. The sea had built Carthage's empire, but without control of the waves, even the mightiest maritime power could only watch as its destiny slipped beneath the tides. Carthage's merchants didn't just dominate trade, they rewrote the map of the ancient world. Picture a web of routes stretching from the misty tin mines of Britain to the incense-scented markets of southern Arabia, every thread converging on Carthage's bustling ports. This wasn't mere commerce, it was a logistical miracle centuries ahead of its time. Take something as simple as tin, a metal crucial for bronze. While most Mediterranean powers scrambled for local sources, Carthaginian ships ventured all the way to Cornwall, braving Atlantic storms to secure a monopoly. Back home, artisans alloyed it with copper from Cyprus to craft weapons and tools that fed entire industries. But their real genius lay in value chains. Raw materials rarely stayed raw. Carthage transformed African ivory into intricate furniture, Spanish silver into coinage accepted from Athens to Alexandria. Then there were the luxuries that became synonymous with Carthage itself. Tyrian purple, extracted from thousands of crushed sea snails, dyed the robes of emperors and priests. A single ounce could cost a soldier's yearly wage. Silphium, a now extinct North African herb prized as seasoning, medicine, and even contraceptive, shipped in delicate ceramic jars stamped with Carthage seal. The city didn't just move goods, it created desires. Tariffs and treaties turned this flow of treasures into rivers of gold. Every foreign ship docking in Carthage paid duties, while its own merchants enjoyed preferential rates in ports from Sardinia to Sicily. When rivals like the Greek colony of Massalia threatened their dominance, Carthage didn't just compete, it strong-armed. Treaties barred Greek ships from trading west of Sicily, turning the western Mediterranean into a Carthaginian lake. Yet their boldest venture wasn't about control, it was pure exploration. Hanno the Navigator's legendary 5th century voyage down Africa's coast reads like an ancient odyssey. 60 ships sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, founding settlements as they went. His logs describe pillars of fire, likely volcanic activity, and encounters with gorillas his crew called hairy people. While some dismiss it as myth, artifacts like Carthaginian beads found in Senegal suggest they reached farther than anyone imagined. Rome watched this commercial empire with envy and bafflement. Without Carthage networks, early Romans relied on middlemen, paying premium prices for goods that had passed through a dozen hands. Their lack of long-range ships left them vulnerable to supply shocks. When Hannibal crossed the Alps, Rome's greatest fear wasn't just his army, it was that he might sever their tenuous trade lifelines. In the end, Carthage's trade machine was both its strength and its blind spot. The same treaties that enriched it also bred resentment, and the merchants who forged alliances sometimes forgot to tend them. Rome, though late to the game, learned one ruthless lesson: Controlling trade wasn't about having the best sailors, it was about silencing anyone who dared to rival you. The political heart of Carthage beat to a rhythm unlike any other in the ancient world, a complex dance between merchants, judges, and warriors that kept the city thriving for centuries. At first glance, it resembled Rome's republic with its checks and balances, but peel back the layers and you'll find a system where commerce and crisis shaped power in ways that would baffle even the most seasoned Roman senator. Two annually elected Shophatims stood at the helm, not quite kings, not quite consuls. Think of them as cross between CEOs and high judges, overseeing everything from temple sacrifices to trade disputes. Unlike Rome's patrician elite, these leaders often emerged from Carthage's mercantile class, their fortunes tied to the city's prosperity, but real power lurked in the shadows. The Council of 104, a shadowy senate of wealthy elders, held veto power over military decisions and could even crucify failed generals. Some historians call this an oligarchy cloaked in republican trappings. Others argue it was a ruthless meritocracy where money talked but competence kept you alive. Here's where Carthage flipped the script on Rome. While the Roman Republic clung to birthright patricians versus plebeians, Carthage's assembly allowed even low-born merchants to voice grievances, provided they could shout loud enough over the din of the marketplace. After disastrous defeats like the First Punic War, reforms reshuffled the deck. The Council of 104 gained authority to audit military spending, a direct response to corrupt contractors who'd skimmed funds from warship budgets. Yet for all its adaptability, the system had a fatal flaw. When crisis struck, factions turned inward. Hannibal's father Hamilcar faced constant second-guessing from rivals back home, his Spanish campaigns undermined by politicians more obsessed with profit margins than battle lines. Rome's republic, by contrast, became terrifyingly unified in wartime. Where Carthaginian merchants debated the cost of a siege, Roman senators voted as one, then sent their own sons to legions as tribunes. That difference in DNA would prove decisive. Carthage's government excelled at building wealth but faltered when forced to choose between gold and survival. In the end, a system designed to prevent tyranny may have ensured destruction because when the fires came, no single voice could rally the city to its last desperate stand. The battlefield at Zama had barely cooled when Hannibal found himself facing a new kind of war, one fought in council chambers rather than mountain passes. Stripped of his armies but not his cunning, he returned to Carthage not as a defeated general, but as an elected suffete, determined to reform the very system that had failed him. With the sharp eye of a tactician, he audited Carthage's corrupt treasury, exposing embezzlement so blatant that even his political enemies couldn't look away. He slashed through bureaucratic rot like he'd once cut through Roman supply lines, proving that his genius wasn't confined to warfare, but old grudges run deep. Wealthy elites, furious at his reforms, whispered to Rome that Hannibal was rebuilding Carthage's war machine, a lie that clung like smoke. When Roman envoys demanded his surrender, the man who'd once humiliated legions became a fugitive in his own city. Under cover of night, he slipped past Roman spies and sailed east, beginning an exile that would read like a map of Mediterranean intrigue. One day advising the Seleucid king on anti-Roman tactics, the next whispering strategy to Cretan rebels, Hannibal became a ghost that haunted Rome's imagination. His sardonic wit never faded. When King Antiochus hesitated to confront Rome, Hannibal supposedly quipped, "If only you knew how little it takes to satisfy them, they fear an old, homeless man more than an empire." The irony was piercing. Rome, now the Mediterranean's unquestioned master, still trembled at news of a gray-haired wanderer plotting in distant courts. The end came in a small Bithynian town by the Sea of Marmara. Trapped by Roman agents after years on the run, the legend chose his final move with characteristic precision. Crushing a vial of hidden poison, he muttered, "Let us relieve the Romans of their fear." His death in 182 before the Common Era didn't bring Rome peace. His specter lingered for generations. Generals compared themselves to him, politicians invoked his name to justify aggression, and for centuries, Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal is at the gates, remained Rome's shorthand for existential dread. Yet this fixation obscures Carthage's broader tapestry. While Hannibal's shadow loomed large, other figures shaped its destiny: the explorer Hanno mapping African coasts, the innovative admiral Adherbal pioneering naval tactics, or the diplomat Hasdrubal negotiating fragile peace. Rome's obsession with one man speaks volumes. Perhaps they never truly understood the civilization that produced him. Carthage wasn't just Hannibal, but without him, history might have forgotten it altogether. Long before Hannibal marched his elephants across the Alps, his father Hamilcar Barca was already carving a legend into the mountains of Spain. This wasn't just a general, it was a man who refused to accept defeat. After Carthage's humiliation in the First Punic War, with Rome bleeding them dry through war reparations, Hamilcar saw salvation in the silver-rich hills of Iberia. Leading a ragtag army of mercenaries and loyalists, he didn't just conquer territory. He built an empire within an empire, founding cities like Acre, Luke, modern Alicante, to secure Carthage's future. His strategy was simple yet brutal: use Spanish wealth to rebuild Carthaginian power, one mine at a time. Then there was Hasdrubal the Fair, Hamilcar's son-in-law and Hannibal's brother-in-arms. While history remembers Hannibal's daring, it was Hasdrubal who held the Iberian frontier together with a mix of diplomacy and steel. He negotiated the Ebro Treaty with Rome, buying precious time for Carthage to consolidate its Spanish assets. But his real genius lay in city building. New Carthage Cartagena wasn't just a military base. It became a thriving hub with shipyards, foundries, and a harbor so secure it could weather any storm. When Roman assassins cut him down in 221 BCE, they didn't just kill a commander. They shattered the careful balance holding Iberia together. Yet not all Carthaginian leaders pulled in the same direction. Enter Hanno the Great, the wealthy aristocrat who saw the Barcid Spanish adventures as a reckless gamble. While Hamilcar and Hasdrubal poured resources into Iberia, Hanno prioritized North Africa, arguing that Carthage's future lay in controlling its Libyan heartland rather than chasing distant silver. This wasn't just policy disagreement, it was a civil war in slow motion. Hanno's faction starved the Barcids of troops and supplies, forcing them to rely on mercenaries, a decision that would later haunt Hannibal in Italy. Why do these figures fade in Hannibal's shadow? Rome's historians had little interest in documenting Carthage's internal politics unless it served their narrative. Victors write history, but they also simplify it, reducing complex rivalries to footnotes in the story of their greatest enemy. The truth is, Carthage was never just one man or one family. It was a chorus of competing visions: merchants versus soldiers, expansionists versus traditionalists, Africa versus Europe. Perhaps what frightens empires most isn't the enemy they face, but the ones they never fully understood. While Rome fixated on Hannibal, they missed the larger lesson: that Carthage's resilience came from its diversity of minds, not just the brilliance of a single general. And in that oversight lay the irony. Rome spent decades fearing the wrong ghost. The flames that consumed Carthage libraries didn't just destroy books, they erased voices. Scrolls that might have told us how Hannibal strategized, how merchants navigated monsoons, or how farmers turned deserts into orchards, all reduced to smoke and ash. Rome's victory wasn't just territorial, it was a silencing, ensuring future generations would see Carthage only through the eyes of its conquerors. What secrets vanished in those fires? Consider Philistus, a Carthaginian historian whose works were so respected that even Greeks cited them. Fragments suggest he documented naval battles with vivid detail, possibly offering a counterpoint to Greek and Roman accounts. Or imagine the lost memoirs of Carthaginian generals. How differently might we view Cannae or Zama if their tactics were explained in their own words? The tragedy isn't just the absence of facts, it's the loss of perspective. Victors write history, but the defeated often understand it more deeply. Remarkably, one Carthaginian voice did slip through Rome's cultural purge, Mago the agriculturist. His 28-volume farming manual was so invaluable that the Senate ordered it translated into Latin, though characteristically, they stripped his name from most copies. These surviving fragments reveal a society obsessed with innovation, from grafting fruit trees to calculating ideal plow depths. Even in defeat, Carthage's practicality impressed its destroyers. What might change if Carthage's narratives survived intact? Perhaps we'd know the real stakes behind the mercenary war, or the diplomatic tensions before the First Punic War. Maybe we'd hear Dido's story from her own people, not Virgil's Roman poetry. Instead, we're left piecing together clues from amphory stamps and temple dedications, like trying to reconstruct an epic from its pottery shards. Rome understood the power of stories better than anyone. By erasing Carthage's texts, they didn't just conquer a city, they rewrote reality itself, turning a vibrant civilization into a cautionary tale about ambition punished. Every surviving Roman scroll about Carthage, cruelty, or excess served a purpose to justify the unjustifiable, and in that they succeeded beyond measure. For 2,000 years, Carthage remained the villain of its own story, until archaeologists began listening to the whispers left in the ashes. Rome didn't just defeat Carthage on the battlefield, it waged a relentless war of words that shaped history for millennia. The term Punica fides, or Punic faith, became Rome's ultimate slur, twisting Carthage's reputation for shrewd negotiation into a stereotype of treachery. Every broken treaty was proof of their deceit, every strategic retreat branded as cowardice. Yet surviving records tell a different story. Carthage's treaties with cities like Rome and Syracuse were meticulously detailed, with clauses for arbitration and renewal, hardly the work of a people who scorned their word. Virgil's Aeneid poured literary gasoline on this smoldering prejudice. His Dido, the Carthaginian queen who falls tragically for Aeneas before he abandons her to found Rome, wasn't just a jilted lover, she embodied Rome's deepest anxieties. When Dido curses Aeneas' descendants before stabbing herself on a pyre, Virgil wasn't writing romance, he was coding Carthage as the spurned enemy whose vengeance must be eternal. Never mind that the real Dido likely lived 3 centuries before Aeneas' mythical era. Poetic license became political weapon. Dig beneath the propaganda, though, and contradictions emerge. Why would a culture allegedly notorious for broken promises maintain such extensive treaty archives? How did Carthage govern a multi-ethnic empire for centuries if trust was impossible? Even Rome's allies sometimes praised Carthaginian envoys for their eloquence and fairness. The truth is, Carthage's real crime wasn't dishonesty, it was effectiveness. Their contractual precision and maritime dominance made them formidable competitors, and Rome knew the quickest way to justify destroying a rival was to paint them as morally bankrupt. But history is rarely so binary. Imagine an alternate timeline where Carthaginian chronicles survived intact. How might their version of events reframe the Punic Wars? Perhaps Hannibal's Alpine crossing would be celebrated as brilliance rather than recklessness. Maybe Dido's legacy would center on her statesmanship, not a poet's invented heartbreak. The irony is palpable. Rome, which demanded absolute loyalty from its subjects, immortalized Carthage as the betrayer. Yet empires, like myths, are built on the stories we choose to believe long after the facts have turned to dust. Picture a Mediterranean where Carthaginian sails, not Roman eagles, dominate the horizon. What if Hannibal's victory at Cannae had been the beginning of the end for Rome rather than its darkest hour? The streets of Carthage might have echoed with triumphant hymns to Baal Hammon instead of ashes settling over silent ruins. But counterfactual history isn't about rewriting the past, it's about revealing what we truly value in the present. Had Hannibal breached Rome's gates, the geopolitical landscape would have fractured in ways we can scarcely imagine. Carthage's empire likely wouldn't have followed Rome's brute force assimilation. Where Roman legions imposed Latin and crucified rebels, Carthage tended to build commercial networks, not cults of conquest. Imagine a world where Punic, not Latin, became the lingua franca, a Semitic-rooted tongue weaving through North Africa, Iberia, and perhaps even Gaul. Temples to Tanit might have stood where Notre Dame does today, her crescent moon symbol gazing over a vastly different Europe. Tolerance could have been Carthage's greatest legacy. Unlike Rome's rigid hierarchies, Carthaginian society thrived on cultural flexibility. Phoenician, Greek, Berber, and Iberian traditions coexisted in its ports. A Carthaginian-ruled Mediterranean might have preserved more local customs, languages, and religions, avoiding Rome's heavy-handed standardization. Picture Alexandria's library flourishing under Punic patronage, or Celtic druids recording their lore in adapted Phoenician script. Yet empire building always exacts a price. Carthage was no utopia. Its wealth relied on silver mines worked by forced labor and mercenary armies with shifting loyalties. A Carthaginian superpower might have avoided Rome's autocratic excesses, but could it have maintained unity across 3 continents without similar coercion? The very mercantile pragmatism that fostered tolerance might have also prevented the strong central governance needed to sustain such a vast domain. Counterfactuals flirt with fantasy, but they reveal deeper truths. Rome's victory gave us roads, aqueducts, and a template for imperial bureaucracy. Yet Carthage's alternative vision lingers like a ghost. Perhaps its greatest lesson is that history isn't inevitable. The Mediterranean's destiny hinged on a handful of battles, a few key decisions. And that's the haunting beauty of What If. It reminds us that the world we know is just one thread in a tapestry of infinite possibilities. The flames that consumed Carthage couldn't erase centuries of cultural roots, they simply scattered them across North Africa like embers waiting to reignite. While Rome celebrated its victory, Punic traditions quietly took hold in the kingdoms of Numidia and Mauritania, blending with Berber customs to create something entirely new. Local rulers, eager to legitimize their power, began claiming descent from Carthaginian nobility, weaving their ancestry into the fabric of their rule. Listen closely to the inscriptions from this era, and you'll hear whispers of a language refusing to die. Neo-Punic, a simplified form of Carthage script, persisted in markets and temples for centuries under Roman rule. Merchants in Leptis Magna haggled using Punic numerals, while votive stones to Tanit bore bilingual texts, Latin on the surface, but beneath it the cadence of a culture that wouldn't be silenced. Even the Berber kings played this delicate game of identity. Massinissa, once Rome's ally against Carthage, later styled himself as a unifier of Punic and Numidian heritage. His grandson Jugurtha went further, reportedly rallying anti-Roman sentiment by invoking Hannibal's name. These weren't just political maneuvers, they were acts of cultural salvage, stitching together a suppressed past with the necessities of the present. Centuries later, Augustine of Hippo, North Africa's most famous theologian, still wrestled with Carthage's ghost. In his sermons, he referenced Punic proverbs and lamented how Rome's conquest had severed his homeland from its Phoenician roots. The city's ruins, standing just miles from his birthplace, served as both warning and inspiration, proof that empires crumble, but ideas outlive stone. And then the unthinkable, Carthage rose again, not as a political power but as a symbol. Byzantine emperors rebuilt its ports, Arab dynasties repurposed its stones, and European colonialists mined its myths to justify new conquests. Each rebirth twisted the legacy, but the core remained a testament to resilience in the face of oblivion. Rome may have salted the earth, but some seeds, it seems, were never meant to stay buried. The ruins of Carthage slept undisturbed for centuries until the winds of nationalism began to stir along the North African coast. In the 19th century, as European powers carved up the continent, a new generation of Tunisian scholars and activists dusted off ancient texts and saw something startling in Carthage's story: not failure, but resistance. Here was proof that their land had once birthed a civilization mighty enough to challenge Rome itself. The same city Rome tried to erase became a rallying cry against colonial rule. Walk through modern Tunis today, and you'll find Carthage everywhere, not just in the fragments of temples by the sea, but in school textbooks, street names, even the national narrative. Tunisia's first post-independence president, Habib Bourguiba, deliberately linked his vision of a modern republic to Carthage's legacy of maritime trade and cultural pluralism. The message was clear: we aren't just inheritors of Arab or Ottoman history, we spring from deeper roots. UNESCO's decision to declare Carthage a World Heritage Site in 1979 cemented its symbolic power. Archaeologists from across the globe now work alongside Tunisians to peel back layers of Roman rubble, searching for traces of the original Phoenician city beneath. Every recovered artifact, a fragment of pottery, a child's toy, becomes a thread reconnecting the present to a past that colonialism tried to sever. So why does Carthage's ghost still haunt us? Maybe because its story is a mirror for every era. Ambition clashing with empire, ingenuity undone by hubris, and above all, resilience that outlasts even the cruelest destruction. The Romans thought they'd buried Carthage forever, but cultures have a way of resurrecting themselves when least expected. As the setting sun paints the ruins gold, visitors often pause near the old Punic ports, where waves still lick stones laid by Dido's descendants. It's a place that invites reflection, not just on what was lost, but on how every ending carries the seeds of a new beginning, and that's a lesson that transcends time. Carthage's story isn't just ancient history, it's a warning etched in stone and blood, echoing across centuries to today's superpowers. Look closely and you'll see unsettling patterns. Trade empires tightening their grip until rivals push back, militarism masquerading as security, the intoxicating lure of vengeance clouding judgment. The parallels between Carthage's trajectory and modern geopolitics aren't just poetic, they're practical lessons in the high stakes of power. Take adaptability. Carthage mastered the seas and markets, yet faltered when Rome copied its naval tactics and turned them into weapons. Sound familiar? From tech monopolies to military strategies, dominance today hinges on the same principle. Innovation alone isn't enough if you can't evolve faster than your rivals. Rome didn't win because it was inherently superior. It won because it learned, absorbed, and outmaneuvered. Then there's the poison of vengeance. Hannibal's oath to his father bound Carthage to a cycle of retaliation, blinding it to diplomacy's potential. Modern conflicts, from trade wars to territorial disputes, often follow the same script: grudges passed down like heirlooms, each generation inheriting the battles of the last. The price: Carthage's ruins stand as a monument to what happens when pride outweighs survival. But perhaps the most haunting lesson is how incomplete destruction really is. Rome razed Carthage, banned its language, and rewrote its history. Yet fragments persisted in Berber traditions, Punic loanwords, even the grudging admiration of Roman writers. Empires may fall, but cultures resist erasure. Today, as ancient artifacts resurface and scholars decode long-lost inscriptions, we're reminded that no victory is ever total. So what does Carthage's ghost whisper to us now? that the true measure of power isn't just in conquest, but in foresight, the ability to see beyond the next battle, the next deal, the next insult. Rome may have won the war, but Carthage's legacy challenges us to ask, what does winning truly cost? And are we, like them, too focused on the enemy at our gates to notice the cracks in our own foundations? The once mighty city of Carthage now lies in fragments, its grand temples reduced to scattered stones, its bustling harbor choked with silt, its name whispered more often in legend than in history books. But this isn't just a tale of destruction. It's the story of how a civilization's echoes endure long after its fall. From the ashes of its ruin, Carthage left behind a legacy that shaped warfare, trade, and even the way we think about empire. Think of the Mediterranean today, its ports, its trade routes, its cultural crossroads. Many of these traces lead back to Carthage's mercantile genius. The idea of global commerce, the art of naval supremacy, even the concept of multicultural hubs, all were refined in Carthaginian dockyards and markets centuries before they became the norm. Their innovations in agriculture, from irrigation to crop rotation, still influence farming practices in North Africa. And let's not forget language. The Phoenician alphabet they carried across the seas became the ancestor of scripts used by billions today. But perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in the lessons Carthage offers about power. Here was a society that mastered the art of prosperity without conquest, that thrived on adaptation rather than domination until it collided with Rome's inexorable hunger for control. The irony is stark. Rome won the wars, yet Carthage's ideas outlasted the empire that sought to erase them. Even in defeat, Carthage forced Rome to evolve, pushing it to build navies, adopt new tactics, and eventually to grapple with the limits of its own ambition. Hannibal's words, "I have come not to make war on the Italians, but to liberate them," ring with eerie prescience. Was he a conqueror or a revolutionary? A monster or a martyr? History, as always, depends on who tells it. Rome painted him as a villain, but his strategies are still studied in military academies. Carthage's story reminds us that history isn't just about who wins, but about which ideas survive the flames. So what do you think? Was Carthage the brilliant underdog, a beacon of innovation crushed by brute force? Or was Rome's victory the necessary triumph of order over chaos? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear which civilization resonates more with you. And if you're fascinated by the rise and fall of empires, don't forget to subscribe. After all, the past isn't just a graveyard of forgotten kingdoms. It's a mirror, and the reflections are always worth another look.